Hi guys, okay, so this is your video lecture for the interviewing part of this module. So this is for pages 400 through 419 in your Communicate book. Let me go into slideshow mode here. Okay, so this is going to kind of give you some general, excuse me, I'm still a little bit sick, general information about interviewing, different types of interviews, and what you can expect, particularly in employment interviews. And I also plan to put some how-to guides from some experts in the field in links in the module as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So interview protocol, what is that? Well, interview protocol is a list of questions used to elicit desired information from an interviewee. Let me go back a slide. So this is the questions that are either asked by the interviewer or responded to by the person being interviewed. I'm sure, have had interviews in your life or seen interviews in your life. So you kind of maybe have an idea of what those interview questions look like. They're typically organized into two types of questions, primary and secondary questions. So primary questions are specific questions about major topics. So they're the ones that are really planned in advance. Let's say you're in an employment interview and the interviewer asks, why do you think you would be a good fit for this job? That would be a primary question. So let's say you talked about your experience in another job and the interviewer had a question about something you said in your response. Well, then they would ask a secondary question, which is a follow-up question to provide more information about primary questions. And secondary questions may not be planned in advance as much because they're used to get additional information about the primary questions. The primary and secondary questions also are usually a combination of open and closed questions and neutral and leading questions. And we'll talk a little bit more about all four types of those questions in the next couple slides. So open questions are broad questions. They're designed to allow the applicant to respond in detail about things like feelings, opinions, information, and experiences. They involve longer responses and give you the opportunity to tell the whole story. Closed questions are focused and brief. They only are one or two word answers, often yes or no. They allow the interviewer to control response and do not allow for complexity and nuance. So some examples of different kinds, and we'll talk more about it, but let's say you have a test. And in the test, there's a question that's true or false. True or false question would definitely be a closed question. You don't really have a whole lot of options. Multiple choices are also closed because you're choosing from specific preset responses. You're not composing your own response. An essay question where you're coming up with what you want to say and presenting it, you're in control of the information, would be an open question. So here's some kind of examples of how open versus closed questions start. So open questions often begin with what, why, or how. Closed questions, are meant to elicit very limited answers. So they say is, or, where you might answer yes or no, do, did, where you answer yes or no, would, will, can, could, was, were, have, has, which, these would all be yes or no. Which, who, when, where. So these would just, you would end up with a very limited response. You wouldn't answer like with a paragraph. You'd answer with just a few words. More information. Open-ended is a question meant to designed to elicit a meaningful answer based on a person's feelings, thoughts, and knowledge. So how do you feel today? What's your favorite memory from childhood? How exactly did the fight between the two of you start? Why can't I come along with you? Closed is a question that limits a person's choice of answers, typically with one-word answers like yes or no. So, are you feeling better today? You'd answer that yes or no. May I use the bathroom? Will you please do me a favor? Can I help you with that? Did Dad make the cake today? So, yeah, all of these would be yes or no answers. Neutral and leading questions are different kinds of questions. So, a neutral question does not direct how a person answers. It does not indicate any bias or indicate the interviewer's position. There's not a specific right or wrong answer. Leading questions guide respondents toward a certain type of information or imply a preference for one answer or the other, and they may indicate bias. In a lot of guides, you'll see leading questions presented in a negative light, and they can be depending on the situation. But in teaching, we often use leading questions to give students hints to kind of help them guide their answer so that there's information about what we want to hear in the question itself. And so I think that it really depends on the situation, whether neutral or leading are better or worse. Like there's not really one that's good or bad, I don't think. And you can use both in an interview, and you can receive both in an interview. So some more examples, because I know this kind of is difficult to grasp in theory. So a leading question might be, in general, how healthy are you? So healthy, it comes with a lot of connotations. So alternative wording to make it less leading would be, in general, how would you rate your health, where it's more open to the respondent. Leading question, to what extent do you agree with each of the following statements? So this implies that the respondent needs to agree to some extent. So alternative wording to make it less leading and more neutral would be, to what extent do you agree or disagree with each of the following statements, which allows them the opportunity to disagree as well and makes it much more open. We encourage employees to enhance their skills. Would you be interested in receiving training? So this is a leading question because presumably coming from an employer who's pushing the employee to enhance skills. So of course the employer is going to feel pressured into saying, yes, I would definitely be interested in receiving training, whether they are or not. Alternative wording to make it neutral would be, please rate your interest in receiving training, which doesn't put any preference for what the employer wants in the question. So then it would be neutral. More examples. So neutral and leading question. So a primary question that's open and neutral would be, how do you feel about the new GPA requirement? A closed primary question that's neutral would be, do you approve or disapprove of the new GPA requirement? Probing here, by the way, is secondary questions. An open leading question would be, most students favor the new GPA requirement. How do you feel about it? Primary and leading and closed would be, do you prefer the new GPA requirement, like most good students I've talked to? Well, that's pretty, yeah, the student's going to say yes, I mean, they want to be a good student. So then we have secondary questions here. So the primary was, how do you feel of the new GPA requirement? And an open neutral would be, why do you feel that way? So that gives the student complete control over the response. A closed would be, is your approval moderate or strong? It's still neutral, but they can choose between two options. It could be even, well, I guess they would have said here in the first one that they approved. So it couldn't really be more neutral there. Leading, if you favor the new requirement, why'd you vote against it? So this student voted against it, so now they're asking secondary information about it that's leading them to a certain answer. And a close would be, I assume you favor the new requirement because you're graduating in 2 weeks. That's kind of judgmental, but okay. But yeah, so that would definitely be leading because it's presuming something about the student. So let's look at some types of interviews. So the 3 types we talk about in the book are information gathering, media, and employment. And we'll go into more information about these. Information gathering interviews are situations where someone is trying to get specific information from someone else. So this might be witness interviews, patient interviews, interviewing a source for an article, interviewing employees about job satisfaction, research projects, audience interviews, anywhere where you want to get more information to help guide what you're going to be doing next. So some tips for this: choosing the interviewee. You want to choose someone who has expertise or experience you can't get elsewhere. So you don't want to waste someone's time, getting information that you can get from somewhere else like Google. You prefer experts in a field or people in unique and relevant situations. You want to contact the person to set up a time for an interview, prepare protocol questions, and research the interviewee in advance so that you're able to target your questions to them. Before the interview, make sure you dress professionally and be on time. At the beginning, be polite, ask permission to record. During the interview, keep it moving, monitor nonverbal reactions to kind of gauge what the person is feeling, get permission to quote. And at the end, you want to confirm their credentials, make sure that the information that you have is correct, end on time, and thank the interviewee. Media interviews are interviews that are intended to be published in some way, so like in a newspaper, on TV, or online. Before the interview, make sure you respond immediately to requests because people in media often have very, very strict time limits. You can identify potential talking points, like central ideas you want to present during the interview, and think about how you'll tailor the information to your audience. And then during the interview, be careful about nonverbal cues. So kind of watch your face and make sure that you're appearing professional and appropriate throughout the interview. You also want to be clear and concise. Realize everything you say is on the record. And if we want to go Miranda here, realize everything you say can be used against you. And make sure that you transition between ideas effectively, which is called bridging. So that brings us to employment interviews. That's the bulk of this presentation. So I'm going to stop there and do the rest of it in the second part, which I'll have up very shortly.